see all of you here and some very familiar faces. So today I'll provide an overview of this 25-year journey researching metacognition and addictive behaviors. The title has a double meaning, so thinking about thinking and addictive behaviors is metacognition. So I want to make clear at this juncture that I never had an addictive behavior. Okay? Well, I did eventually later on in my life, when I was 41, developed a mild dependency on zopicon, a sleeping drug. But otherwise, I was completely drug-free, no behavioral addiction. And so I do feel sometimes that I have not chosen this path. It's like been chosen for me. 1999 was the year when it began. I entered a sort of depressive state which lasted months following the victory of France at the 1998 World Cup. That's the year exactly, March 1999, when I started working as an alcohol counselor. I already had sort of doubts. Maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, this modality that I'm supposed to be employing in my work, doesn't really provide a sufficiently good understanding. I started saying, well, maybe there's a chance I could be doing something in this field, because I observed that there were many residual symptoms in people who suffer from addictive behaviors, dangerous internal experiences such as craving, which were labeled as dangerous rather than actually part of the learning to let go of anything is that we need to surf the craving. Obsessional thoughts about engagement, continuous thinking about when I will be next using or engaging in an addictive behavior, the perception of lack of control, rumination and worry, repetitive thinking about why I used, to do with my personality, why then, why not now, etc. And then finally avoidance. So the fear that situations might trigger fear responses whereby they're avoided because we might meet a person or be in a situation where we use. Aaron Beck, founder of cognitive therapy, in his prime as a psychoanalyst. So we should never forget that Aaron Beck, the first 50 years of his life, before he founded cognitive therapy, was a psychoanalyst, not a psychologist, not even, well, he was a psychiatrist, but not a psychologist. To my great happiness, he stated in 2005, and I was already well into my journey, that CBT had only modest effectiveness and high relapse rates. So back to the point of residual symptoms. Maybe cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't really work because people relapse. It does work a bit, by the way, but not that well. What cognitive mechanisms may be fueling these residual symptoms? And there are many, and I was focusing particularly on the thinking about thinking. Are they purposefully neglected, not known, or not understood? I think they weren't understood. They were known to an extent because Aaron Beck in 1979 mentioned the word decentering. So he'd understood this idea that is central to my work, that it's not really what you think, but how you relate to the thoughts and how you try to control them that is key in psychopathology. I came across Professor Adrian Wells. The year was 2000, and he had just started then research on metacognition and psychopathology, thinking about thinking. You know, there were moments where I thought, you know, similar to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. When you read the books, there isn't much big change. You know, it's so pure. You know, every note is in its place. Metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking and the processes that we use to monitor our thinking, assess it, plan and control it. And according to Professor Adrian Wells, this was the key to psychopathology. And there's an element of luck in my career, because I do believe that to an extent you live and die by your citations. There was an escalator effect. It meant going against the establishment. The establishment was cognitive therapy, and it wasn't easy, because however good an article was or a piece of work was, it was very difficult to get it published. However, I needed to have some photos from my youth, so you can see when I had some hair on my head. That on the bottom is me at university, clearly disturbed by my studies in philosophy. But I would say that I was disturbed throughout my childhood by events, probably a fair share of events, more than average. But also I was genuinely interested in philosophy and sociology. By the time I was 16, I'd read all of Karl Marx. I liked political philosophy a lot. And when I was at university, I remember a statement during my philosophy of mind seminar, where I said, I wonder if thinking about thinking is involved in mental health problems. Because at the time I was afraid of thoughts relating to mental health. I thought, what if I am the person who's disturbed? let's not study psychology. I can remember this thought, and I let it stay. At that time, Adrian Wells hadn't looked at thinking about thinking. The metacognitive view of psychopathology, some of you are here very familiar with it. They emanate in all sorts of different situations. And we have beliefs, and most of these beliefs are learned by the time we're 12 years old, about how to control our mind. I'm afraid that for most of us, psychological problems arise not because our thoughts are negative, we share all the same thoughts, death, aging, loss, but it's how we attempt or how we control them that backfires. But from this perspective, thoughts and associated emotional states are far less important than what we do to control them. There's an object level, that's where thoughts intrude into consciousness. And by the way, Adrian Wells' work, which was paradigm shifting in psychopathology, like every act of creativity, is really linked to cross-fertilizing. So ideas from developmental and educational psychology that were cross-fertilized into psychopathology. We have an object level and a meta level. Object level is there, the thoughts, the emotions that come to our mind. These are monitored and assessed by a higher level. That higher level will determine whether that thought is acceptable or not and how it should be controlled. And there lies the problem, because traditional cognitive therapy, not behavioral therapy, behavior therapy is about doing what we fear and habituating to it. In traditional cognitive therapy, we would invest our resources in rationalizing the object level. But from the perspective of Professor Adrian Wells, in a way it's a loss of time, because we wouldn't have dealt with the system that is managing that object level. So if we have a negative thought and we rationalize it, and we have a really good database of great experiences, we can turn around and say, yes, I am actually quite good at saying I've done quite well. But if we still think that having negative thoughts is bad, and that through worry, ruminating, we'll be able to rationalize or cope with these thoughts, it doesn't matter how many times we rationalize things, we'll return to feeling bad. Because on that higher level, we judge thoughts negatively, whatever they are, and we control them in ways that backfire. I need to control my thoughts at all times. Having a thought means I'm weak, whatever the thought might be. If I worry, I'll be ready. If I ruminate, I'll understand. These are the beliefs that then drive what we do to control our mind. And for almost everyone in this room, this will be a fairly automatic process until you come to realize what you're doing. You may have done it for years, on a spectrum, from very severe to very moderate, but without any awareness. Thought suppression, where we say to ourselves, we don't want to think about something, we try to avoid it, but unfortunately that has a rebound effect, and it ends up in consciousness again. And avoidance, which is addictive behaviors. It's a good reason why I engage in addictive behaviors, because there's a temporary relief, amongst many things, from upsetting thoughts and emotional states. So very simple, something intrudes into our consciousness, we believe that it's not good, we believe it should be controlled, we believe that maybe through worrying and ruminating or using alcohol or gaming or using the phone, we'll be able to control the thought. And at that point, we get stuck. What we're stuck is in a situation where we continuously think about our own thoughts and what they mean, because that level up there, the meta level, the beliefs and the control, has not been changed. And you'll see why this view of psychopathology may help explain why MCT, or metacognitive therapy, is considerably more successful than CBT. We have on average 2,000 to 3,000 negative thoughts a day. Imagine sitting down and going through each one of them, rationalizing. The metacognitive approach frees us from the object level. And whatever upsetting thought comes to my mind because the provost has figured out all my strategies, I try to remain detached from that thought. It might be true or it might be wrong. And no amount of worrying or ruminating will change. Metacognitive therapy, 25 years of research, bottom up, understanding the mechanisms, psychological mechanisms through research. The opposite of what Aaron Beck did in cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck woke up around about the age of 49 and 50 with midlife crisis and decided to create cognitive therapy without any idea of how the boxes relate to each other. But people believed, because it made sense. And also it made sense because in the 1970s there was a rise in the medicalization of mental health problems, and he provided diagnostic models. But what if these models don't reflect reality? So when I came for my first PhD session with Adrian Wells, other than him taking famously the cognitive therapy book of Aaron Beck and think, what is this about? And shut it. The second thing he said, so how do you feel that, what do you think the model would look like for the metacognitive model for addictive behaviors? I said, it's going to be like this, and this will be the box, and blah, 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 blah. He said, we know nothing. It will take you 20 years to figure that out. And then another 20, if you're still at it, for testing. Testing whether it's a more effective treatment based on the model that's present. So, fast forward 30 years, and now we have really big studies that show that metacognitive therapies versus cognitive behavioral therapy is simply a superior form of treatment. 57% of people recovered generalized anxiety versus 38% in CBT. Depression, 74 versus 56. So more or less, back of the envelope, it's 50% more effective, metacognitive therapy. And there's no reason why, in due course, these same numbers couldn't be reproduced across addictive behaviors, I think. There are some limitations to that because addictive behaviors, as I always say, are quite complex and multifactorial. That took 25, 30 years. And the reason being is it was very difficult to fund these trials. Adrian Wells only managed to do these studies, which were really paradigm-shifting studies, because of the Norwegian investment, okay? Sitting on masses of gas and oil. But Norwegian investment in him, in the belief that this will be a better form of treatment than cognitive behavioral therapy. These beliefs about our own thinking play an incredibly important role in anxiety and low mood, but they do in trauma, in obsessive compulsive disorder, in everything. They are the most powerful predictors of psychopathology, our beliefs about our own thinking. That's a fact. Even in obsessive compulsive disorder, where for 20 years we believed that inflated responsibility was the driver of obsessive compulsive disorder, when you pitch inflated responsibility versus metacognitive belief, it disappears as a construct in the statistical analysis. And these are the classic thoughts that are very important in the research we've done. I need to control my mind at all times. No, you don't. If actually you believe that you don't need to control it, you're much less likely to engage in an addictive behavior. Not being able to control my thoughts is a sign of weakness. On the contrary, we should accept lots of irrational thoughts coming to our mind all the time and ask ourselves simply whether they can be problem solved or not. Otherwise, we can postpone them and return to them later. I'm not saying it's always easy to do. If I use alcohol, I will suppress my anxious thoughts. Yes, only short term, because you'll prime yourself to become more anxious over time. Experiencing craving will mean I use. Absolutely not. For many of the people who are here from the MSc in addiction, we know that craving is an experience that lasts, 10, 15 minutes? And if we don't start playing Tetris or tell ourselves not to think of craving, it will subside, and it's part of the recovery. If I ruminate about why I lapsed, I won't lapse again. The opposite is true. We have to not ruminate as to why we've lapsed, because we have to feel fully our pain in having lapsed. If we ruminate, we're temporarily moving our attention away and trying to figure out whether it's to do with our personality, our upbringing, why did it happen? It just happened. Feel fully the badness of what's happened, because that emotion will help with not lapsing again in the future. So you can see the paradoxical natures of these beliefs about controlling our mind. They lock us in. This article was a nightmare to publish. It was rejected 11 times. I always mention this in the MSc Addiction, Psychology and Counseling. And I was always rejected in some kind of mafia-like way. You know, we really like it. There's nothing wrong with it. No. Okay. The last time I thought, okay, I better send it to medics. Avoid psychologists. I sent it to Alcohol and Alcoholism. They loved it. And just 2 days before it was published, we've invited a third reviewer. Why? And we decided we don't want to publish it. So we fought back. We contacted Cambridge. We made a big fuss, and they published it. And what it really did show is that when you pitched metacognitive beliefs against expectancies disappeared statistically. So that was the breakthrough article, because it showed that when you pitched the traditional Beckian construct of expectancies, if I use, I'll be sexy, if I drink, and all that stuff, compared to the metacognitive beliefs, it lost statistical significance. And in fact, bar one, and this was a normal sample, all metacognitive beliefs survived. So I thought that's maybe why there was some resistance in publishing it. But that article really opened up research, and a lot of people became interested. Another big one we did, we looked at whether beliefs about the need to control thoughts would predict outcomes in cognitive behavior therapy longitudinally. And that's exactly what we found. And we found that these beliefs were stronger than the initial levels of alcohol use and mood in predicting relapse. So basically the message is, okay, you want to reduce relapse rates? Okay, you've got to deal with controlling the drinking, you've got to deal with the emotion, but above all, you've got to deal with this idea that having certain thoughts is bad, that they need to be controlled or suppressed. Perseverative thinking in addictive behaviors. So repetitive thinking. Kopf, head, Kino, das Kino, cinema. This is what we do when we engage in worry, rumination, and desire thinking. We're overthinking. And it's so fast and automatic, we might not even be aware. Rumination, which we know is the royal road to relapse in depression. Continuous thinking about why we behaved in a certain way in the past, what's wrong with us, is it something to do with our background, our personality? And the second perseverative thinking construct is worry, which is the royal road to relapsing in anxiety disorders, where we continuously think about the future. What if A then B? What if B then C? What if C then D? 95% of people here will do it, more or less. And what happens is that with this repetitive thinking, we end up continuously thinking about our own thoughts, and we can't exit them. And that's the point where we enter a state of psychopathology. What we put forward was this idea that we might spend a certain amount of time imagining what we don't, thinking about it in a repeated way, until the craving for that we shouldn't have becomes unbearable. In traditional cognitive therapy, the thoughts about the self and the past and the future, beliefs about the self, are central. In metacognitive therapy, our own thoughts about ourselves don't matter that much. What really matters is if we're spending an inordinate amount of time worrying, ruminating. Because the more we spend time thinking about our internal states, the more anxious and depressed we become. The whole point of exiting psychopathology is externally focused attention. Flow, ideally, where we lose ourselves in an activity. So again, if you have a tendency to ruminate today, irrespective of how much alcohol you use, or how anxious and depressed you have a much greater chance of relapsing. So that gave us another idea or piece of information that really these processes that were ignored in traditional cognitive behavior therapy were important. Desire thinking. It's a voluntary process, although it becomes habitual over time. We don't know when it sets in, probably for most people in teenage years. It's a conscious and intentional processing of the pleasant consequences, and it predicts addictive behavior longitudinally, far beyond craving, beyond expectancies, beyond all these other existing constructs. It incubates craving. These are the experiments we ran, some of the studies we've done where we incubated, we increased the level of desire thinking in people that were perfectly fine and had no problem, and then observed them over a week and 2 weeks, and tallied whether there was an increase in craving. And there was a significant increase in craving. And it wasn't that these people were addicted to begin with. And it fuels permissive beliefs. So the more you engage in this form of thinking, the more likely you're going to give yourself permission to finish off March before you do the right thing in April. Again, permissive beliefs are at the center of the Beckian model that I showed you at the beginning. We've showed that they're just a byproduct of desire thinking. So in some sense, this was one of the most important studies we did, because we showed that Beckian ideas are secondary to what we're doing with our mind. All this work over these years has resulted in a new way of understanding from this perspective addictive behaviors. This is what we think goes on. There are 3 phases to an addictive behavior. A pre-engagement phase, where we come across a trigger, okay? And then we have beliefs. And that trigger might be boredom, that trigger might be anxiety, that trigger might be low mood. And we have beliefs about that state we shouldn't be experiencing. That state should be suppressed. As a consequence of that, we might worry that we have it. We might start thinking, well, I can't quite have it, but at least I can imagine having it. As we engage in these strategies that are very short term, yeah, and really occur on our prefrontal cortex. So they kind of distract us temporarily from our emotions. Our craving and negative affect increases. At that point, we enter a new phase whereby we might start thinking, well, you know what, it's really getting out of hand. If I drink, I'll be able to control this state. My anxiety will go down. We engage in the addictive behavior. As we do it, we might start to pay attention to external cues. Where am I going to get the pint? Where am I going to phone? Where's the next hit of gaming? And as we do that, we lose a sense of internal monitoring. So if we all realize that after a couple of glasses of wine, for example, we are okay, that would be the stop signal to continue to use. But most people don't monitor their internal states. They continue to drink until there is no monitoring left. And we have that post-event rumination that many of us will have had, where we then ask ourselves, why did we do it? What's wrong with us? And unfortunately, that phase comes with another cost, which is to prime us to have worse mood. And hence, rumination predicts relapse longitudinally. So all these bits you see in the model, and this is just a generic model, and when you work with clients, you go through this model. And you might be working with somebody who's not using at the moment, but who's lapsed recently, the box on the right. Or you may be working with somebody who has not used, but is experiencing difficulties in resisting the craving. So you would look at the desired thinking, the worry, and how to manage, how to restructure those beliefs. After these 20 years of building the evidence, we have now come to that phase where we are testing metacognitive therapy. This was a single case series. It was the first study where we looked at the effectiveness of metacognitive therapy, and you can see the direction of the data. QFS is quantity frequency scale, and MC are metacognitive beliefs, and for all these consecutive clients, they basically got to a point where they were under the threshold of 20 for the QFS, which is moderate, still moderate drinking. Some would argue it needs to be lower. By the way, their mood scores, everything improved too. So this was the first single case series. We're doing now quite a few more studies. We're doing a study on gambling, and hopefully we'll get to a point where if we gain sufficient momentum, and the momentum is not only in these sort of smaller trials, the momentum is also in testing concepts. We might not run a whole trial for metacognitive therapy, interrupting worry, interrupting research, and so on. We might simply get money to test a single intervention to interrupt desired thinking and see whether it reduces the chances for relapse. This is the thought I have, and I colored it blue because there is a lot more work to be done, which causes me anxiety to an extent, but that's fine, because I'm not getting younger. I thought that getting old was a problem that affected others. Now, but it's also good to see that others are growing old. I'm not alone. But there are so many people to thank on this journey, and this will take only a few minutes. Adrian Wells, bottom left, a picture from today. He's got older too. Nothing would have happened had I not met what I believe to be the most important clinical psychologist in the history of clinical psychology, is my view. Another pact with the devil. How many people have got pacts with the devil here? Good. I'm not famous. Yeah, but it's compatible. It's very compatible.
Marcantonio Spada is pretty challenging. Today's lecture on addiction I thought was amazing. He spoke about the issue with addiction is how we think, and some people don't like to think. They don't think about their thinking. So today's lecture really was Professor Spada challenging us to be more conscious of our thinking and also to be more present in our lives. I think a big element of Professor Spada's message today was life comes and goes. What's important is to be there, to live, experience the moment, not to get caught up in one's thoughts.
I thought it was very interesting. Metacognition. I wouldn't have thought it was so involved.
No, and it's something that I knew nothing about. You know, as a forensic scientist, it's learning more about an area that we knew nothing about.
How there are kind of different lenses about seeing the world around you, and it's always interesting to see it kind of outside of chemistry and physics about how psychologists view the world in terms of their scientific understanding.
So I've known Marcantonio since 2015 to 2018 when I did my master's in addiction psychology and counselling at London South Bank University. I love the concept of metacognition. I love the whole idea that he portrays with thinking about thinking. I find it very interesting. I found his lectures very interesting when I did my master's, and I knew that the lecture would be really insightful, and indeed it was.
It brought back quite a few memories of when I was studying here 6-7 years ago or so, and a lot of nice memories, and then a little bit of reflectiveness in where I've moved from and what I've used from the studies that I've done here to my job now. So yeah, he was certainly one of my favourite lecturers.